few comments about the various methods that one finds used throughout the Orthodox world, whether it's parish churches or cathedrals or monasteries or seminaries, to abbreviate the complete order of the service that is provided in the typicon. And perhaps you realize that if we were to do everything that is prescribed to be done every day, most especially for the service of matins, which from its very origin is intended to be a vigil, a service that takes up a good chunk of the night and concludes in the early morning, we would, if we were doing the daily cycle of services in a church every day, we would be in church many hours every day as people who are in the monks in the larger monasteries are. That is central to their life. But there has been not only recently, but over the centuries of liturgical history, varying attempts, whether it's in smaller monastic communities or in parish churches, and here I guess I am aiming what I say for those churches, those priests, and those people who desire to have as full an expression of the liturgical life of the church as possible. I'm not aiming what I have to say for those situations where there is a flagrant laxity, a lack of love and desire to be fed at the fountain of the liturgical life of the church, reducing things, always asking questions like the most alien question to the Orthodox spirit is, what is the bare minimum we have to do? It's even alien to the spirit of particularly Byzantine liturgical hymnography, which always tries to say it in as many ways as possible, as you know, hopefully so that at least a few of them will sink into our hearts. So what I will attempt to address is that, assuming that it is our desire to have as full a liturgical cycle as possible, not simply to be Sunday morning churches, but to have as much of the daily cycle as is possible for us, whether in some cases that's each day or in other cases on certain days of the week. Nevertheless, we want to have that, what I like to use the expression, the factor that defines who we are as we live through time each day. It is these gatherings of the church for common prayer that defines who we are as the church and defines who each one of us is as members of the church. Yet, nevertheless, even though we want this, it is immediately evident that it is very infrequently possible for us to do everything that is provided each day to be done. So the question arises, how can we abbreviate the services in a way that is, first of all, consonant with their content, that still enables them to be the icons of the church's common prayer, the experience of the church's common prayer, still enables us to be nourished by those things contained in the services, whether it be the Psalter or the common prayers that are done by the deacon and the priest, or the great and inexhaustible almost hymnography of the church. What's the best way to do that? Now, throughout liturgical history, it seems to me I can identify at least three methods of abbreviating services. They all have their advantages and disadvantages, it seems to me. And I don't think there's any one particular method that I'm again using. I certainly do agree with that we have Western minds and we like things broken down. So I'm not aware of any previous attempt to kind of categorize the methods of abbreviating services, but I'm going to try to do that now. I think that there are things that perhaps can be imitated and things to be avoided in each one of these methods. The first method of abbreviation is to attempt to do a great deal quantitatively of the prescribed psalmody and hymnography of the service, but in order for it to take less time, instead of it being sung by either the whole assembly or by a group of singers, as the case may be, it is relegated to one person, the reader, who does it in a quick manner. Now, historically speaking, it's helpful to comment here that this is a method, and of course we run into it everywhere. I don't think there's any situation that doesn't utilize this method to some extent, but we need to realize that it developed rather late in the history of our services. All one has to do is, again, either one can read the Typicon in the original or look in older service books. The assumption is made that the psalmody and the hymnography of the church services is almost entirely intended to be sung in common, and not to be relegated to one person and chanted in a monotone. Only very limited aspects of the church services were originally intended historically to be done in this manner, and the tendency has been over time to increase the amount of the service that is entrusted to one person, and so the one person becomes the kind of mouthpiece of the assembly. We generally in our churches have tried to keep that at a minimum, because we're striving for a congregational expression of psalmody and hymnography. And particularly we can see when, for example, the hymnography of the church, all of it is designated to be sung in this tone or that tone, in this melody or that melody, and therefore to have one person doing it to no melody at all is at least whatever the benefits of that there may be, and that's, I guess, an arguable point. It certainly departs from the original intent of the hymnographers from whose inspired pens it comes. So that's one method. The second method is to, again, it's perhaps product of the Western mind to analyze the liturgical services by breaking them up into units. But they can, in fact, for the purposes of study, be broken up into units. For example, we see that if we look at Vespers, we see that Vespers after the opening blessing consists of various units of psalmody, hymnography, and prayer. First, there is a fixed psalm, a psalm that does not change from day to day, Psalm 104. Then there is a litany. Then there is another. Then there is a variable unit of psalmody, the psalms of the day, in which throughout the week's services, the entire Psalter is intended to be covered when everything is done. So then there's a unit of variable psalmody, the kathisma. Then there is another litany and prayer. Then there is a fixed unit of psalmody, the evening psalms, or sometimes they're called the Psalms of Light, the Lord I call, as we refer to them. And with this fixed unit of psalmody is included a central unit of variable hymnography. Then there is the fixed hymn of Vespers, Joyful Light. Then there is a psalm refrain or prokimenon for each day of the week. Then there are sometimes readings from Scripture, and so forth. I'm not going to go through the whole order. One attempt to one method to abbreviate services is to want to do something from every one of the units of which a service is comprised, but to abbreviate many of the units in some method or other. Now, examples of this. I don't think this is too frequently done in our churches, but very common in the Orthodox world in various places is to reduce, for example, the opening psalm of Vespers, Psalm 103 or 104 in the Hebrew numbering, instead of singing the entire text of the psalm, which is a poetic glorification of creation, and that's why it was included in the Jerusalem tradition. First, hasn't always been there, by the way. First, as part of the vigil on Saturday evening, and then later as part of the daily structure of Vespers, to reduce that psalm to 3 or 4 verses, which were intended to be sung as refrains to the verses of the psalm. Most of us are familiar with, bless the Lord, and what follows. Bless the Lord, O my soul. O Lord my God, you are very great. O Lord my God, how manifold are your works. In wisdom you have made them all. Glory to you, O Lord, who have created all. That's Psalm 104. Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit. That is an example of we must do some part of Psalm 104, but because we're not going to sing the whole thing, it becomes reduced to these few verses. There are a number of examples of this. There sometimes I was at a Matin service a while back in a parish in which after the resurrection gospel had been proclaimed at Sunday Matins, and the people were coming up to venerate the gospel book, and normally during this Psalm 50 is sung, that instead of singing all of Psalm 50, I forget whether it was a cantor or a group of cantors singing it, they did either every other or every third verse of Psalm 50. So the effect of course, Psalm 50, I think we would agree, kind of holds together as a piece. The effect was that one rather is having these holy words to cover an action, but not doing justice to the integrity of the text. You can tell, I suppose, that in my opinion, this particular method I don't think is an advantageous one. Of reducing. Another example is, for example, we come to the hymnography of Lord I Call, and the decision will be made, well, we're not going to sing all 10 stichira, and sometimes pastorally that decision is made, and I'm not criticizing it, by the way. Sometimes because when I'm functioning as the ecclesiarch in Ben Lomond, I eliminate certain things too. But sometimes the decision is made, well, we're not going to sing all the prescribed hymnography, and sometimes it goes to the point, well, we're not even going to, even though this is the feast of St. Andrew or something, falling on Sunday, we're not going to do any of the hymnography of St. Andrew, but we'll do a couple verses of the resurrection. We'll sing, Lord, I call upon you, and let my prayer arise. Then we'll eliminate the rest of the Lord I call psalms and proceed immediately to bring my soul out of prison that I may give thanks to your name. Sing 1 or 2 stichira from the Octoikos, and then because by that time the deacon is done censing the church, sing Glory Now and Ever in the dogmatic hymn. That's another attempt to abbreviate services that in this method that I don't think has much to teach us, to tell you the truth. Now, the third method, and maybe we got to stop here because it sounds like lunch is nearly ready. No? Oh, okay. The third method is, in some ways, I guess what I would call a perhaps more controversial one. It makes some people uneasy, and what it consists of is this. It is, again, looking at each service as constructed of a certain number of units of psalmody, hymnography, and prayer, And a decision is made by the pastor, by the ecclesiarch, by whoever's competent to make the decision, that we will do certain of these units of the service, those which hopefully, the decision is made in this manner, hopefully in such a way that the integrity of the service is still maintained, and those units of the service that we elect to do, we do pretty much in their entirety, respecting their integrity as units of psalmody and hymnography and prayer. And then those units of the service that we take upon ourselves, again, hopefully in humility, to decide that we are not going to do, we leave out altogether. Now, the reason why some people are uncomfortable with this is they think, and again, I'm not in any way speaking lightly of this, they think that to take one particular part of a service and leave it out altogether does violence to the structure of the service. My opinion, and maybe this is at this point this becomes free for discussion and be a good time for people to express their opinions. I think that given the fact that we are going to abbreviate the services in one way or other, given the fact that if we are trying to have as full a liturgical life day by day as we can, it does less violence to the services to choose certain units of the service and do them in their entirety and leave out others than to try to do every unit of the service, but do it in a very incomplete manner so that it appears one is hopping from this to this to this to this to this in very rapid succession. In order, it sometimes seems to give a kind of almost legalistic expression that, well, at least we're doing a little bit of each little part. The trouble is with doing a little bit of each little part is that each part does have, even from the point of view of literature, much less spiritually and theologically, has an integrity that is, when that is dismembered, the violence it does to the service. For example, to do every third stanza of Psalm 50 is in some ways more violent an act than on certain occasions leaving Psalm 50 out altogether, it seems to me. Now, examples of this, concrete examples of this that in one way or other one finds, particularly in our parishes. You know that except during Bright Week, Vespers always begins in the present practice with the 103rd/104th Psalm, the Psalm of Creation. And we must, it's good to be aware, though, historically, that has not always been the case, that, as a matter of fact, in the entire history of the cathedral typicon of Constantinople, in Hagia Sophia, Vespers never once began with Psalm 104, ever. Vespers frequently began with either another fixed psalm, sometimes the 85th, or responsorial psalms, very similar to the antiphons that we do now at the beginning of liturgy. But the tradition of Constantinople did not begin Vespers with Psalm 104. Using Psalm 104 at the beginning of Vespers is a heritage of the Church of Jerusalem that, as I mentioned, used it particularly at the beginning of the Lord's Day Vigil, beginning that vigil with glorification of God as Creator. The content of Psalm 104 being precisely that. It sums up. Sometimes it's been described as the first chapter of Genesis in poetic form, in hymnographic form. So from that original use at the beginning of the services for the Lord's Day, it came to be in the monastery of St. Savas, from which we, of course, obtained the typicon, and then later in the great monastery of the Studios in Constantinople, came to be part of the daily use. So every Vespers, every day, except during Bright Week, began with Psalm 104, and that's the tradition we have inherited. However, Vespers has always included as well, and this is a universalism to be found everywhere there has been Vespers, whether in the Greek church or the Latin church, has always included a unit of variable psalmody. That there is the attempt in the cycle of time, most particularly in Vespers and Matins, also through the hours, but most particularly in Vespers and Matins, that the church as it assembles attempts to pray through the Psalter sequentially. That means beginning at Psalm 1 and continuing until the end, taking various intervals of time to do this. In the present Typicon, if we were to do everything, we would begin with, the Psalter is divided into 20 sections, 20 kathismata, and we would do the first one on Saturday evening at Vespers. That's 8 psalms. So that means that after Psalm 104 and the Great Litany, there would be Psalms 1 through 8 sung, and then continuing throughout Matins and Vespers of every day for the rest of the week, more psalmody at Matins than at Vespers, 2 or 3 kathismas at Matins, generally 1 at Vespers. The entire 150 psalms are covered in 1 week. Now, even very long time ago, there, in large monasteries, this has faithfully been adhered to. But in smaller churches and communities, it has been modified in various ways. In some places, for example, in the great church of Constantinople, they sang all 150 psalms every 2 weeks. So it was a little bit less. And then one hears of unofficial attempts to have a workable, variable Psalter that is used. Sometimes people use this even in their personal rule of prayer, which is an attempt to be a reflection of the liturgical prayer of the church. They have a rule that, for example, tries to go through a Psalter in a month's time. And sometimes, and even, for example, in the English Book of Common Prayer from the 16th century, that the prescribed Psalter for morning and evening prayer was a monthly Psalter, and in this sense was a reflection of what was going on at the time. So, but the important thing is that there has always been in the public evening service of the church a unit of variable psalmody. Now, very frequently, one can go to Vespers in various places and find that Psalm 104 will be chanted, yet the unit of variable psalmody is eliminated entirely. And often people do not think this as unusual. Yet, on the other hand, Psalm 104 as an opening psalm has not had a consistent place, historically speaking, at every Vespers. Yet to think of the presence of Psalm 104 as more important every day than the unit of variable psalmody that always has been present, this is what I think can be brought into question. So an example in many of our churches is this what could be called a compromise, that on Saturday evenings and on the evenings of great feasts, we sing Psalm 104, because it is certainly our liturgical inheritance, and more than appropriate as the glorification of God as Creator. But on other days, when we have daily Vespers in our church, we begin with a unit of variable psalmody. And sometimes for people who are so accustomed to hear Psalm 104 every day, this comes as a bit of a shock. But I don't think should be understood as a shocking thing. Now, some might ask, well, why don't you just do both? But then we indeed have to address this pastoral issue. If we are going to have a daily service, and if we are going to encourage our people to come, and not simply not simply to come just for the sake of being there, but also to come so that they may become part of this corporate expression of the church life and be formed and nourished by it. We also have to consider that most of our people are, especially in our AEOM parishes, they have their families with young children. They are not going to be able to come, or they are not going to be able to come without great effort. Now, there's degrees of effort, I guess. There is effort. We all have to have effort. Nobody's ever going to come to church without effort. And sometimes there is asked of every member of the church great effort. During, for example, Lent, during Holy Week, an amount of great effort, it seems to me, is asked of everyone. Can we ask great effort every day if we're going to have a daily cycle of prayer in our churches? I would suggest that I don't think we can. Every community has to, and there, of course, it's mostly the obligation of the pastor, but not in isolation from the people, but to determine what, on the other hand, does indeed express this ongoing effort and ascetic struggle, but on the other hand is not burdening the people unduly. So this is one of the expressions of abbreviating the service, of choosing one unit of psalmody, either the fixed one or the variable one. So, and I think that kind of discussion will go on as to the best way to do this for a long time. I think it's a healthy thing. It's better to have attempts for people to have a fuller liturgical life and struggling with trying to be faithful to what is given than just saying, as one hears said, what is most terrifying to me personally, and I think to many others also, and one hears it all the time from increasingly, it seems, almost everywhere, that the attempt to have daily services, the attempt to nourish the keeping of traditional fasting, as Father Lex put, it's all monastic, people say. It's monastic to have daily services. It's monastic to fast. Well, the plain fact of the matter is there have been daily services and fasting in the church long before there's ever been organized monasticism. And if we are going to have a church life that enables our people to live in such a way that they are defined by the kingdom of God and not defined by the world, it's going to have to be made available to them, I believe, with as much frequency as is possible. So I would think that, struggling over the years to become more and more familiar with the full content of the services, trying to do as much both qualitatively and quantitatively as we can while remaining sensitive to people's needs and lives, and having to make choices sometimes that maybe it's the first time, I don't know, that it's been that some people have decided that we'll do this particular part of the service, we won't do this particular part of the service, but we do this in an attempt to at least have some ongoing expression of something. And I do think that provided we remain within the bounds of the received tradition of the church, there is a certain freedom in this way. There's going to be, I know, a lot of debate as to what that freedom is and to what extent it goes. But certainly I believe there's got to be some of it there. Maybe that's a good place to stop for now. And maybe more materials such as what we tried to do in the past when our little liturgical commission was active, services with some commentary, suggested proposals. Maybe we'll be able to resume providing more things like that.